Namaskar, I am Dr. Dilip Panda. Media in any country is a mirror of its society's intellectual and ethical fabrics, reflecting the quality of critical thinking and wisdom. Critical thinking involves analyzing, questioning, and presenting information accurately, while wisdom entails guiding public opinion towards societal well-being. In India, with its vast and dynamic media landscape, evaluation of these aspects reveals both challenges as well as potential, shaped by systematic, cultural, and economic factors. Critical thinking in media requires rigorous fact-checking, balanced reporting, and the ability to discern significant issues from distractions. However, Indian media often falls short, as evidenced by the recent Indo-Pak conflict after the Pahalgam terror attack. Most of the TV channels ran after sensationalism to achieve higher TRPs. Some TV channels and social media platforms broadcasted unverified or misleading information. On 24th May, that is on Saturday, the Times of India has published a news analysis titled "When Indian TV News Made Social Media Look Sane." Here, in this piece, it is mentioned how news anchors claimed the Indian TV had destroyed Karachi port, the Indian Air Force had downed Pakistani jets, and their pilots had been captured. Pakistan's Prime Minister sought refuge in a bunker, and its army chief Asim Munir had been ousted in a coup. All these claims are completely false. Some of the Western media organizations had picked up this outburst as a sign of decay in Indian TV journalism. The Economist, for example, the Economist has described the disinformation on Indian TV channels as a, within quote, culmination of decades of descent into inanity, unquote. Further adding that, quote, Indian television achieved the astonishing feat of making social media appear sane, unquote. The New York Times says, quote, anchor and commentators became cheerleaders for war between two nuclear-armed states. Some well-known TV networks aired unverified information or even fabricated stories amid the burst of nationalistic fervor, unquote. India's clear stand on Operation Sindoor was, it was intended to strike the terrorist infrastructure, and it exhibited that it was non-escalatory, that is, without harming the civilian and military destinations of Pakistan. But the Indian news channels showed something else. The New York Times says, quote, Indians watching TV thought their country was only moments away from annihilating Pakistan, unquote. The Economist, noting the commentary by a panelist, says, quote, if news segments were merely outrageous, commentary was unhinged, unquote. Further, I quote, one anchor demanded set fire to Karachi, blow up the entire city. On another channel, a former army officer called Iran's foreign minister a son of a pig, which triggered a minor diplomatic incident. New York Times points out that by pushing falsehoods, prominent news channels harm their audience and themselves. Within quote, it says, within quote, when previously trusted sources become disinformation outlets, it is a really large problem. In the view of the economist, within quote, disinformation about drone swarms and mass suicide attacks was amplified rather than squashed. Broader communities which bore the brunt of blackouts and drone attacks were left groping of facts. The rest of the country was less vulnerable to bombs but not to lies, unquote. In comparison to electronic media channels, newspapers, the print media, seem to be more reliable since, in most cases, they stick to the old rule book of journalism. Every report comes through fact checking and editorial screening. Wisdom in media involves acting as a mediator between leaders and the public. It should give priority to the issues that matter, which would foster informed debates. However, very often Indian media has failed in this role. It must act as the mouthpiece of power. They think that is their motto, and increasingly the media is seen as the mouthpiece of the party in power, with the corporate owners sharing close links to the government. During the Operation Sindoor, some channels amplified divisive narratives. They framed the conflict in religious terms, which fueled communal discord. We must emphasize also the failure to cover critical issues. Serious issues in general, serious issues such as Kashmir crisis, university dissent, Dalit discrimination, beef ban, and mob lynching receive scarce mentions, which reflect the media's failure to address important social issues. The role of watchdog, the media must play the role of watchdog. That role has eroded. Former President Pranab Mukherjee in a speech had emphasized the need for an argumentative Indian, not an intolerant Indian. However, the media seems to be unwilling to challenge the official narrative, perhaps driven by fear, which undermines its role as watchdog. If we observe the systemic issues and societal reflections, we find the performance of media reflects broader societal challenges, particularly in education and culture. If we examine the education system in India, we can easily find out a continuous, persistent erosion of critical thinking because of its emphasis on rote learning and hierarchical values. Only 3% of GDP is allocated to education across 1.5 million schools. This has created a critical mass susceptibility to information. The cultural factors, if we analyze the cultural factors, the media's tendency to frame issues in emotive, nationalist, or communal terms may stem from audience expectations and the socio-political climate. For example, discussion about which Islamic countries would support Pakistan during Operation Sindoor oversimplified geopolitics and simultaneously fueled a divisive narrative reflecting a lack of discernment. We can have some quantitative insight, such as in the press freedom ranking, India ranks 161 out of 180 countries. According to 2023 Press Freedom Index by Reporters Without Borders, India lies below Afghanistan. If we split the media coverages, only 5 to 10% of the time is devoted towards economic realities such as poverty and unemployment, whereas on the other hand, 90 to 95% time is being spent on glamour such as film, cricket, astrology, etc. If we examine the attacks on journalists, 54 journalists were attacked in between January 2016 to April 2017. Earlier, we have already mentioned the meager amount of only 3% of GDP being allocated towards education, that is stretching over 1.5 million schools. The workforce projection shows that India is predicted to have world's largest workforce by 2027. 1 billion people aged between 15 to 64 years of age. If we look the Dalit education example, 80% of Dalit students in a Maharashtra college were made to sit outside the classroom. This is mentioned by Desai et al. In their article in 2008. Recent reports such as 2024 Digital News report by the Reuters Institute have indicated a slight increase in overall trust in news to 41% during the election year, but also highlighted the distrust in partisan commercial broadcasters and independent digital portals that are seen as either uncritical or extremely critical of those in power. Indian media, as of today, does not clearly represent a satisfactory level of critical thinking and wisdom, with so many significant shortcomings in accuracy, independence, and prioritization of issues. Thank you.